Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Sage, and I'm the Executive Director of the AREA, which stands for Augmented Reality Enterprise Alliance. And welcome to our latest in a long line of webinars. And today we're going to be focusing on the work of the Safety Committee. And we've called this webinar Using AR Safely and Using AR to be Safe at Work. And welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world. A quick reminder and a little background about the AREA. We are a global membership funded not-for-profit alliance helping to accelerate the enterprise augmented reality ecosystem. And we're doing that in multiple ways. And one of them is focusing on the importance and the safe delivery of AR. Our members are global and they're in 3 different segments. There are companies deploying the technology. There are providers of the technology, both from a hardware, software, and a combination of those. And then we also work very closely with non-commercial organizations, government agencies, research institutes, and universities. And by bringing everyone together, we have a really clear and strong kind of membership helping to overcome both the barriers of deploying the technology, but also showing and highlighting the benefits. And we really focus on 4 what we call our strategic pillars. The first one is delivering thought leadership, focus on those business decision makers and what they need to understand to be able to successfully deploy the technology. Networking, it's really important about bringing the ecosystem together to learn from each other, to share those best practices and insights. The educate side, we see a big skills gap at the moment. So we're working with educational organizations to bring the next set of skilled workers to the industry by helping guest lecturing, outplacement, setting challenges, and anything we can do to get those skilled people to join the enterprise AR ecosystem. And then finally, overcoming some barriers to adoption. We've coined the phrase pilot purgatory, and we have a number of different committees that are helping companies overcome and successfully deploying the technology, not just from a kind of a proof of concept, but fully within the organization. We have a number of committees, and the safety committee is one of those areas that we're focusing on, and hence the conversation with some real experts today. So I hope you enjoy it. There is an opportunity. Please ask questions. I believe you can see a question mark. So please drop any information, questions, even feel free to introduce yourself on the webinar as well. But really looking forward to this event. It will be made available to everybody through our Bright Talk channel and through the AREA website. And a kind of a great way to engage with these experts. Obviously, the other way for the AREA members is to join the safety committee as well. So enough of me whittling on. Let's get down to the real experts and the people that know this stuff. So I'm related, and many of you will know some of these experts through their work in the area, but also in the wider ecosystem. So we have Cameron from Lenovo, Sarah from NSC, and Gary from Welsh Water. They're going to be introducing themselves as we go through some of our content today. But what we'd like to start off is a kind of a real case study, a real what happens in real life. And this is going to be led by Gary, who works at Welsh Water. Maybe Gary, you can quickly introduce yourself, and then you can go through the slides and talk about a real life case study.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I'm Gary Smith. I head up essentially a team that deliver all the asset information for all of the Welsh Water assets back into the business. So we have about 3,500 colleagues, 3.2 million customers, and around 450 significantly sized assets that either treat raw water to deliver potable water into our network or deal with the wastewater streams. And we operate here in Wales, in the UK, and cover the entirety of Wales, with some small areas of operation in England, in both the southeast and the northeast. So we've been working with AR and have been members of the AREA for many years now, to be honest with you. And I thought I'd sort of set the scene by giving you an example of how we might use augmented reality in a particular example. And we've got a couple of personas here. So Sarah, I don't know, do you want to introduce the personas, or would you like me to do it?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so we've got a couple of personas here. Typical individuals who might be involved in AR operations in an industrial context. So we're not manufacturing here; we're actually doing, doing work on physical assets. So the first person to introduce then is Anna. So she's the project manager, and she's essentially responsible for the AR implementation. And Anna has to consider all of the health and safety considerations in relation to AR, as well as all the operational elements and the cost and the HR and the human factor elements as far as that's concerned. So she's got a real good, strong technical experience with AR, but fairly limited health and safety knowledge. And then the second person in the persona is Jim, who's the safety manager for the operation that we're going to have a look at. And Jim's responsibility is looking at and assessing the health and safety hazards and risks for this new technology, so the enterprise AR deployment. Jim is almost the counterbalance to Anna in as much as he has very limited knowledge of AR systems and no experience with AR deployment, but is, however, a very experienced health and safety practitioner.
So sorry, Gary, is it fair to say that happens a lot when you're looking at a big deployment within an organization? Yeah. You have the AR experts and the safety experts?
I think that's a really valid point, Mark. Yeah, and actually, the AR experts are clearly filled in their own areas of expertise. And one of the challenges I think we'll come to and how we overcome those challenges is bringing our more traditional health and safety colleagues along with us, who may not be as familiar with some of the technology that we're talking about. And I know we're moving forward a little bit, but some of the tools that we've got in the area, including the safety playbook, have really helped us explain some of the risks and the challenges and how we've overcome those safely to those non-specialist individuals. So I'd like to take you to a wet, cold and dark, dingy day in Cardiff in South Wales. So here we have part of our advanced digestion process in Cardiff Bay. So we're now imagining that the on-call standby operator has to find an individual valve on this AD process in Cardiff, but they've not actually been to this site before, and they're not really sure what they need to do in terms of the valve, the direction of turn, and those sorts of bits of information. They're already wearing a whole load of PPE, as you might be expecting, the personal protective equipment that an operator might wear, boots, trousers, high visibility clothing, hard hat, maybe ear defenders, depending on when they go on the site. So they're already, carrying a burden of additional PPE. And it's really important that the tools that we use don't interfere with those or add to that burden. The individual's carrying an intrinsically safe torch and a large spanner, which is probably the two pieces of kit that they use most often in some of our assets. So here we go, we're into the asset now. So how do we actually use AR in reality to try and identify those key bits of the asset that the individual needs to work on? So we use a number of solutions. So they could either be wearable or handheld devices. We're platform agnostic, so we run Android, Windows, and on Mac as well. In this case, though, we're using the RealWear HMT1, which is integrated into the head protection, the hard hat that the operator is using. And we're able to, with a combination of GPS and tracker overlays, actually direct the operator to the correct part of the asset. Once they get to the asset, we can use the edgeless marker tracking to actually display the valve essentially as a floating image over what they see in front of them. So it's a sort of pass-through AR. Essentially, they're seeing a mirror, a graphic of a valve in front of their eye. And the AR then, the animation within the AR then gives feedback to the individual operator on how to turn the valve, which way to turn the valve, and as importantly, how many turns they need to do to actually complete the operation. So the risks are reduced. They've gone to the core area, and then we can then also see what they're doing essentially back in control. I'm sure we'll come back to some of these areas, but back in the control room, perhaps something's gone wrong. The alarm sounds. Could be a person down from a lone working point of view. But we can open, for example, the asset plans and the information in relation to particular assets, and from a geographical distance away, the on-call team can then access that information and again walk through in real time with some direct overlays to find the source of the issues. And we use a combination of display portals, and in this case you can see one of the colleagues at work using one of the Microsoft Surface hubs to actually display some of the information and give us that overlay. We can also display the information in a bigger environment, essentially, and we have a number of display pods within Welsh Water, and we can use these unified screens supported by marker tracking and gesture control to actually pull back the information, and this allows collaboration with experts who are not on site to actually feed back information to our operational colleagues. So a combination of the AR, and I think we're going to touch on some of the areas like remote assistance, which will also help moving forward as far as supporting the AR application as well. So this big 360 Igloo pod, you can see some of the information that's displayed heads up, and you can see this is the I see what you see environment. So I can now see what the operator can see on a particular asset as well. We can also provide guidance and direct operators and give them specific information in relation to AR overlays around safe refuges or areas. In this case here, we can visually indicate the fire assembly point on the works in question, and you'll notice, and we can deal with the detail if anyone's interested in their Q&A later. But you'll notice there's a couple of overlays within that field of view. Bottom right hand one is an overlay, a map, and then you've got some specific information which you can, through gesture control, actually identify to provide the users with a little more information. And then my final slide before I hand back to the rest of the panel then is really around post-incident review and the ability with our AR systems and our overlays to actually pull back specific information. And here, what we're doing is we're pulling back maintenance information on some safety critical equipment in a particular asset. And you can see that we've identified the emergency shower, and then again, our AR tools are able to, in the back end, access that maintenance information, and we can pull forward either for the operator or somebody who's viewing what the operator can see, the maintenance information in relation to some of those safety critical components. So there's my example in a real life example of what Welsh Water actually do in reality. So I'll hand back to Mark, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That's awesome, and it's always and we've been on a journey together. I've been listening and speaking to you, and it's been amazing how you've been built on top of different use cases and different situations to get a good end-to-end solution. I know you're continuing to work on a number of different use cases, but it's great to see in a real kind of live environment, but in a context of safety as well. So thank you for that. I'd like to hand over to Cameron now. So Cameron, thank you again, who's been a huge friend and supporter and insight to the area, but he's also based in Australia, so it's probably some silly o'clock time for him. But Cameron's going to talk a little bit about his journey and how he's moved through different parts of the safety ecosystem in technology. So Cameron, if I can hand over to your good self.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Gary, for showing practical use cases on the ground. Dark, dirty, damp and cold in Wales. It's typically boiling hot over in Australia, so we've got a bit of a difference in some of the environmental considerations for AR, and even really some of the ability to even use some of the AR devices is compromised, certainly in the environment that I work in. A significant number of the devices you just can't actually use. So that is one of the considerations we'll cover. My current role, I'm the I'm the regional manager for augmented and virtual reality at Lenovo, so covering both AR and VR. And I guess that's on the right-hand side of this last decade of my career. My career in health and safety, I'm a chartered safety professional. I started in the early 2000s as a safety professional, and you'll see on the left side of this timeline, that was my thinking, very constrained health and safety risk thinking. What are the issues and how do I control them? Over on the right, as my career's progressed to full-time in technology, has been what are all the opportunities, what are all the benefits, what are all the things we can do? And it represents a shift in mindset from relatively closed and constrained thinking about how do we control risk to reasonably open thinking about how can we effectively do all of these amazing things. And it's a bit of a representation of both Anna and Jim, the two personas we talked about at the start. And certainly don't expect that people would have a full understanding in digital literacy in the technology side. We wouldn't expect that those folks would have a background or a degree in health and safety. Likewise, we wouldn't expect a health and safety professional to have a clear understanding in the digital literacy of a technologist that's working in emerging technologies like augmented reality. I've chosen a career path which has blended both, and what I want to bring to this conversation is some of the practical applications of the well over 200 or probably close to 300 AR deployments that I've done now, and that's what I'd like to focus on, and that blend between safety and technology. And so that's what we'll be covering today as we progress through, and I'll hand you over to Sarah to introduce NSC.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. I am Sarah Isher, the Senior Program Manager for the Work to Zero initiative at the National Safety Council. And like Cameron was talking about, we have EHS professionals and we have technologists. I am more on the EHS side. So prior to coming to NSC, I was an industrial hygienist and ergonomist in a manufacturing facility. I have credentials in both, so it's been great to shift from that mindset to how can we effectively use technology to reduce or eliminate risks in the workplace. And that's what Work to Zero is really focused on. So we are a grant-funded initiative, and we're really focused on increasing adoption of technology to do just what I said, reduce or eliminate fatality risks in the workplace. And where we kind of come in is we are a partner of the area. We have a joint mission, and we really focus on research and education and partnership. And we have created this curated safety innovation journey. So no matter if you're a small business that is just getting into technology, or if you're an early adopter, large corporation that's already adopting technology, we have kind of this 5-step approach to help you throughout the process. So understanding your risks, identifying tech solutions, determining if your workforce is ready to adopt technology, making the business case for innovation in your facility, and then your pilot and implementation roadmap. So quickly, I just want to point out, if you were to look at our website, we have several different safety technologies highlighted. One of those is augmented reality, and we also have case studies as well. So we'll kind of go through the process of talking about AR, but if you ever have questions about other technologies or solutions, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great. And thank you all. What I really like about this group, you've got, Gary, who's there implementing kind of safety procedures within the organization, responsible for that. So he's actually implementing it. We've got Cameron, who has been on both sides, but is now on the technology side providing it. And then Sarah offering that real kind of insight and methodology and kind of standards development to making sure that we deliver AR safely. So thank you all again. A reminder that if you've got any questions, please pop them into the questions box and we will pick them up on at the end. So really the next part of the talk is to answer two simple questions to say, but actually quite difficult questions to implement in reality. So, what safety challenges are companies facing when deploying AR, and how are companies overcoming these challenges? And we're going to have a kind of an open discussion and using kind of context of some of the content that the Area Safety Committee has created. So those are the 2 questions we're going to be answering. We'll probably move a little bit around. I wanted to keep this as freewheeling as possible with getting these experts on the call. But one of the first things we created is the area safety infographic. Some of you on the call will be aware of this, but to me, it's a really excellent tool as a high-level initial starting point. We're looking at some of the risks of wearables in the industrial space, but also some of the benefits. Before we kind of dive into the detail a little bit more, just to let you know that later this year, we'll be moving this online, and you'll be able to click through each of the lozenge shapes, and we'll be developing more information there. So to me, it's all about getting into that detail to really understand it. And I'll be working with this team and the rest of the area team, wider ecosystem, to really fill out the details in under each one of these little lozenge shapes. But let's throw it out to the team there. Maybe Cameron, if I start with you, kind of what are your impressions here, and what are some of the key elements that you would look at when in this diagram, and how does it relate to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. So typically the first thing that comes up when asked a question about is it safe to deploy this technology into an operational environment in an enterprise context, it will be, am I going to get dizziness? Is it going to cause me any discomfort? So that's a physical thing. And what's really important is that the physical side of the impact around AR is really just one portion of the consideration, and it's typically related to the hardware. Whereas the sensory and cognitive side of things about how the human is going to interact in the system, whether they're going to have overload, whether they're going to potentially get frustrated with the technology, we have to understand that an AR deployment is a combination of connectivity often, so how good the connectivity is to get potentially an internet connection, which will then mean that you've got a good quality experience with your software. There are softwares that run offline, of course. The software itself, its color scheme, the way that the images are overlaid in the physical environment, whether they're spatially anchored, whether they make sense to the worker, whether they're providing overload, those types of things need to be considered. And it's not expected that your regular health and safety practitioner or your ICT person that's been installing laptops in your organization and setting up servers is going to know what the hazards and risks are. So the risk management process is fundamentally no different to any other hazard. Working at heights, entering a confined space, you're adding an additional piece of technology into the environment. You're effectively managing change. So when you implement a change, you introduce something new to the organization, there's a responsibility to understand what are the potential hazards, what are the potential risks, and how are we going to control them. Likewise, could this technology actually provide significant benefit? How do you get started? As I said, it's not expected that people are really going to know without having some level of experience. And if the organization doesn't have that experience, who do you go to and where do you go to? And that's where this infographic resource to me is a really great overview. And then you can dive into those layers and peel them back with more information. So that's pretty much, the physical side of things is one piece, and it's often the one that people think about. And it also is very much about the individual person. And this is about changing a full system and a way of working. So this isn't just about an individual or individuals that are wearing equipment. This is about how the whole system is being modified to try and improve the design of work. And the ultimate goal should be to improve the design, experience, and safety of work through that technology. That's my overview on that.
Thanks, Cameron. And it is a multifaceted kind of problem, but it also brings multiple benefits, and we'll come on to the benefits a little bit later as well. So Gary, in terms of, I know one of the areas is important for you is the kind of environmental side. You've got a huge amount of assets over a huge amount of area that can be in quite rugged spaces as well. How about your thoughts on the environmental part and the management of that?
You're absolutely right, Mark, and I think Cameron's touched on some of them. And I think later when we talk about how we try and manage that risk assessment process, we can readdress some of those issues. But if you think about our example personas, if we look at that middle pie section there, the Sentry one, in terms of the what is happening in terms of the impact on the sensory perception of the individual user. So is there potentially a negative impact on the user of the AR equipment? And that's often a question which is raised by the non-AR aware health and safety practitioner, which is why that combination that Cameron's talking about is really useful, because we can see those areas of synergy and growth occurring. So I think in terms of benefits, as far as trying to deal with some of those questions that are concerned, I mean, it's really important that the delivery tools in terms of how we deliver our AR overlays are wide and various. So we're not limited in trying to obscure or potentially obscure an operator's field of vision, for example. So, for example, in some cases, we wouldn't use things like HoloLens 2 because it simply obscures the operator's vision too much. But in other environments, that piece of hardware is perfectly acceptable. You'll sort of note from the the HMT that the offset screen, although it gives you a sort of full field of vision, does give you increased environmental awareness. So you are aware of what's happening. So it helped us challenge some of the concerns we had around that lack of awareness to environmental hazards. But there are real perceived benefits, and we touched in the sort of case study in the persona there, we talked a little bit about he's carrying or the individual operator's carrying an intrinsically safe torch and a large spanner. So intrinsically safe because we don't want them to go into some areas. And actually some of the benefits we've got in terms of the AR applications in Welsh Water is actually we can increase their situational awareness and actually stop them or alert them from approaching areas which may be inappropriate for them to go into, and we can use that with either toxic gases or explosive gases and dusts, or even simple things like confined space entry. So we've been able to make those areas alive to individuals, and in terms of that environmental awareness, it's actually increased. So by far the benefits have outweighed any of the negatives, and we've really been on a continual journey, and we'll probably talk about communication and things, but that continual journey of bringing along those people who perhaps are less aware about some of the things that we can do with AR in an industrial context has really helped us drive some of those things forward and reduce risk overall.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Guy. Sarah, any kind of thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, as I listen to these two gentlemen speak, I really understand how this fits in with kind of our digital readiness and making sure that whenever you're integrating technology, that all levels of the organization understand what the solution is, what the hazard that it's solving for, but also ensuring that you're deploying it safely. So I think it's great to, ensure that you have the right mindset, skill set, and tool set whenever you're adopting these technologies. So, making sure that your workforce is digitally ready and you have all the right people in the conversations is great. As an EHS professional, I'm not an AR specialist, so it's good to have, outsider perspective to help you implement these successfully. And as I'm looking at the benefits, I see the cognition, decreased dependence on working memory. We actually have a case study from a partner where employees were expected to rewire an aircraft. So they were having to look at drawings, enter a confined space, work from their memory to rewire, taking about 4 hours back and forth, working around all these people. They successfully implemented AR headsets and we're able to increase quality, decrease cognitive strain while doing this, and no one got hurt while rewiring the aircraft in a confined space. So, like Gary said, even though there are some hazards, the benefits far outweigh, the risk when implementing these technologies.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Just a quick couple of comments from myself, and there's a question I think is relevant to this slide, and we'll move on to the next couple. But the AR experience part, the poorly designed UX and UI, and I'm not saying it's always poorly designed, but it's something that one of the other committees that we have within the area of the human factors has been focusing on. Development of some best practice, looking at kind of human-centered design, and trying to think about the experience. If it's in a 3D environment, can we design experiences that are a little bit more friendly to 3D rather than taking some of our 2D experiences and just moving that into the 3D world? So lots of interesting work. And again, if anyone's interested in finding out more, that would be a great place. So I think this question's very relevant here. I've got an answer to it, but thank you for the person who's made the question. But basically, what have you seen as the biggest challenges regarding usability from the end user perspective in your case studies, use cases? And the comfort, intuitiveness of gestures, accuracy, acceptance of technology. So there's a bunch of things there. Again, just a quick, maybe your thoughts if I go through all three of you real quick. Cameron?
There's no quick answer to this. I think, first of all, thank you so much for researching this area. There's just not enough research going on. This is such a fast-moving industry. There's a lot of organizations that are using this technology, and the research base is weak at best. So thank you for that. In relation to specifically your question, what are the biggest challenges regarding usability? We're talking about AR. This is just in my context. So AR devices that are binocular, that are giving you 3D content in 3D space, have a real challenge with outdoor environments. We know this, and it causes massive frustration regarding usability for the user experience. Colors get washed out, images aren't crisp, information just isn't able to be properly viewed in the context, so the use case is tanked. So that's a big one. But everything you've discussed, I mean, to be honest, I think the one that's the least raised is comfort, because I think the devices are getting more and more comfortable. They've got better accessories to improve comfort. So I think comfort is something that we're going to continue to improve. Gesture control, I still think we haven't really got the technology to have amazing gesture control that's intuitive to our regular gestures, and we certainly aren't getting accurate voice control in high noise environments for, I think RealWear kind of sits in a category of its own in relation to voice and also being able to use outside. But that aside, there's some real issues there. The last one I would say is, as you mentioned, Mark, around, we need to rethink and reimagine the design of the experience. This is about, if we're leveraging 3D content in 3D space, we have to design for that experience. And right now, to be frank, there's a lot of lazy design. There's a lot of just grab it and stick it and see if it works. It's exactly like putting paper into a digital checklist. You need to reimagine the checklist for digital, and then you need to then reimagine that checklist for spatial. And we're not doing that. So keep researching. I'd love to chat with you. Feel free to reach out.
Perfect. I think for time, I don't know if there's any quick things you can add. Sorry. I think that was an excellent. No, it's an excellent answer, Cameron, as always. But is there anything else you've got burning, Sarah, Gary, you'd like to add to that?
So the only observation I'd mark is really I'd add the word credibility. Cameron sort of touched on it, but as soon as your AR overlays don't match the real world, you've lost credibility. I think Cameron used the word, your program is tanked. So you could quickly lose the enthusiasm of users and the business drive to try and introduce some of these things. So I think that really is a valid one. Uncomfortable equipment doesn't get worn by operators, so it doesn't get used. So it quickly loses its way within our business work streams as well. And the things that we thought were going to be problems, like battery life and everything, have not really turned out to be huge issues. And very quickly, the last one, it's a really odd one, but it's around human behavior. So hand control and gesture control is an unusual thing, and actually people feel quite conscious in doing those hand and gesture controls where they're in groups of people. So we've really focused on voice control, noise cancellation. I know you're not a spokesman for HMT or RealWear, but noise cancellation, I think, as Cameron's acknowledged in the HMT one with RealWear, is really good. So actually we focused on voice control rather than hand gestures to try and overcome that I don't want to look silly in front of my mates type scenario.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I think for us, just from a broader perspective, a lot of our members are just saying that there aren't enough success stories, and they aren't sure whether or not, you know, this type of technology would actually be useful in their work situation, or whether or not it would bring in additional hazards like we've talked about. So I think it's just great that we're able to talk about it and make it more normal, right?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And again, the area we've been desperately has a lot of organizations asking the ecosystem to share their success stories. We'd love to be a place where people can go and not only read about the use cases, which is the problems being solved, the generic ones, but also the case studies. So any listeners there, please feel free to drop me a note and share any case studies and success stories. Okay, let's flick on a little bit. You know, we've touched on this a little bit, so I don't expect we need to go into too much detail. But Cameron, I think your point is things are getting definitely better. I think this is something which we still continue to see, but I think the latest iterations of some of the devices have gone some way to solving the problems or making them more comfortable. Sarah, I guess just from your perspective, just to start with you, anything that you're hearing from your members about poor hardware design?
I mean, just general heavy, can't get used to it. You know, I'm not used to having something on top of my head like that. That's what I hear. But I think part of it is too, they aren't taking the time to look at different options. You know, you might try one and think that just because one model is poorly designed, all AR headsets are like that. But I'm sure that you guys can talk about it more than I can.
The one thing I'd add to this is there's a fundamental lack of diversity in the design. The design criteria is effectively based on crash test dummy design criteria, which is the 50% white male. That's effectively where anthropometric measurements have come from to design these things. The manufacturers are getting far better, but there's no standards for them to develop to for head-mounted AR devices. And don't forget, you know, we're talking about head-mounted devices here. We're not talking about tablet-based AR. We are in the context of this conversation, but in the context of this slide, head-mounted, and you know, glasses, and then the more robust devices. And ultimately, we're not designing for the diversity of our population, and devices are still too heavy for a portion of the population that, you know, they're getting better, but we need to be more conscious with our design choices. And I think organizations that are progressive understand that, and we are starting to see that get into the design. Something as simple as needing to tie your hair up into a pony. Doesn't matter if you're male or female, you've got long hair, overhead straps, these types of things that get in the way. How we manage spectacles for smart glass technology, for AR smart glass technology is a challenge. So there's challenges out there. I think the industry knows that. It's striking a balance, but we have to have diversity in mind, and I don't think we do right now, not well enough anyway.
Good point.
Yeah, sorry, Mark. And the only two bits I'd very briefly add to that is something we didn't think about was heat generated by the device. So where the processing is done in the device as opposed to something that you're carrying with you, heat generated has caused us some challenges in terms of design and compatibility with the existing PPE. So if operators are wearing ear defenders and or a hard hat without going down the expense of perhaps a Trimble device, getting full compatibility to ensure they remain safe from, say, physical noise hazards whilst wearing some hardware can be a challenge.
And I agree.
I think it's worth it. Sorry, Mark.
Go on, Cameron.
I think it's worth explaining as well, like why these are challenges and the fact that it's still worth trialing. Just because there's a challenge, it doesn't mean you shouldn't, you've got to discount it. So heat as an example, the better the optics, if you've got a binocular wearable, the better the optics, the crisper the image, the brighter the image, the more heat it's going to generate. Now, if you want it light, it can't have a fan to dissipate that heat. So you're left with a trade-off. And 15 minutes of wearing a device for a really, really targeted use case might be an amazing outcome. 20, 30, 50 minutes, whatever it is. But that's an example of, give it a go. Just because there's a known trade-off there. When you're doing your hardware selection, it's part of the selection criteria based on your use case. What I often find is people will go to the innovation stand and grab a piece of technology because it's seen as in vogue, cool. And then they're not applying an appropriate approach to this whole arrangement. And that's when you end up with discomfort, employees saying no, and all of the other issues that come with these. So that there's I think it's important to understand from a tech stack where some of the considerations are and how that does impact safety. And the fact that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing if it generates heat. It just may not be the right piece of technology for your use case.
I agree. And I've just my kind of quick comment is that I'm sure you are, kind of new devices coming into the ecosystem that may be on specific kind of use cases or specific industries. I've seen one recently in the construction space, and one of our area members, Rokid, have recently come in as well. So that's great. I'd like to see more devices. I understand the need to maybe focus on particular industries or particular use cases, but I do think we need more in the industry to kind of help overcome some of these challenges that we're talking about. Good. Okay, and I think we touched on this. So if we just a minute or so, I think benefits, from what I've got from the conversation, is the benefits are outweighing some of the challenges and then the kind of costs. Kind of any other specific things you want to do. I want to just add before I hand it over is that the area has actually created an ROI calculator, which is available, and that's one tool. And I understand it's only one tool, but for measuring some of the return on investment bits. But again, a quick blast from you all, maybe starting with Gary on some of the kind of benefits that you're actually realizing, maybe put it into context of your company and benefits. Yeah.
I think some of the benefits are actually quite difficult to actually put a cost around, essentially, Mark, in terms of time, trouble, and effort. But certainly in terms of risk reduction, we have seen a reduction in error rates. So that's really helped us in terms of being a highly regulated industry. So a reduction in internal error and our audit feedback in terms of audit scores and things have actually gone up because we've been able to essentially reproduce tasks again and again. So you're almost weeding out some of the elements of human behavior as far as that's concerned. And I guess one of the other benefits is it's still seen as a fairly exciting area to be involved in. And certainly we get really good buy-in from CEO, finance directors, other directors in the business. And actually one of the challenges we've got at the moment is sort of trying to keep up with the pent-up demand in the business in this post-COVID environment as we come out of lockdown over the last 2 years in a worldwide environment. New use cases are being presented to my teams on a weekly basis, and it's really trying to pick up those where we're actually going to add some value, reduce risks, reduce costs, make things more repeatable. But the benefits are definitely there.
Perfect. I think if it's okay, we'll move on because we want to get on to the next part as well. But so another piece of content that the area has created, and I'm going to say here that this was both Cameron and Gary was actively involved, but there was a gentleman, Dr. Greg Garrett from Boeing, who was instrumental in developing this, but unfortunately passed away a few months. So our kind of gratitude and thoughts goes to his family and thanks to him. But this was a really, and this is available to download and available online. But a little bit about the kind of the safety playbook and the purpose and why we did it. I think Cameron, I was going to ask you to just cover that a little bit, if I'm right. Just your thoughts on why it's important to have this kind of playbook, and then we'll go into a bit more detail about what it is.
Sure. So in all organizations, there's a requirement to manage risk, both from operational risk, financial risk, health and safety risk. And when you introduce something new into an organization, you need to follow that process. And that risk management process is fundamentally no different when it comes to introducing AR, but there's a lot of unknown unknowns because this is new. It's a new technology and it's a new approach, and it basically impacts all parts of the process that you're introducing the technology to. So nobody expects you to know, no matter which persona you bring into the conversation, how you're not expected to be a fully knowledgeable resource. There's just not enough people worldwide that have got expertise or even experience in this area. So the safety playbook is very easy to consume. It follows the standard risk management approach. What are the hazards? What are the risks? What are the recommended controls? What are some of the considerations? Very, very simple. It's certainly not going to, win any research awards for the latest and greatest, but it is grassroots safety 101 as it relates to AR for enterprise deployment. As with all innovation, it is a ongoing work in progress. It's iterative in nature. It requires regular feedback. We know it continually needs improvement, and that's what the playbook is. It's there as a resource, and it's there to be continually updated based on your feedback.
Just to follow up really from where we were discussing elements of the safety playbook, I just want to touch on how we've managed to deal with risk assessment within the application of AR at Welsh Water. One thing we early discovered on our journey was around the generic aspect of risk assessment. And for AR and the application of AR in an industrial context, generic risk assessments really just don't work. There are a number of individual elements that need to be considered, including human behavior, the user, the operator in our case, and how they actually wear and operate the AR device or hold the AR device. And we have an individual preference element that linked again back with our human behavior. Aligned with that really is around the individual's risk tolerance. So each individual operator has a level of risk acceptability built into them. They understand what they're doing. Some of them are highly skilled, but those individual elements of risk tolerance need to be built in. And I suppose one of the other elements is to consider is the pressure on us to succeed. So the new technology has certainly pushed the boundaries. So early adoption for us has really led to some pressure to succeed. So we really have to use the safety infographic and the playbook to try and moderate the pressure for quick advancement, but be able to do that safely with the risk assessment tools.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gary. And I think it's a really important area to understand from an individual preference. I'm a big fan of that as well. Let's move on. So, Cameron, I know certainly in COVID times, the cleanliness and cleaning devices was really important, but I guess that carries on to be important. Yeah, we've got an element within the playbook. Perhaps your kind of thoughts and covering this a little bit would be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly because of the cost of the devices at the moment and the way that these devices are typically deployed, they're generally shared devices. So, and they're worn on your face, and even pre-COVID, infection control and always should be top of mind. So the committee put together in the playbook some generic guidelines, and they are generic, and each individual technology has its own requirements and has its own part specifications. It has its own component parts that have different, some have cloth, some have different fabrics and plastics, etc., that will react differently to different chemicals and different disinfection and cleaning protocols, UVC as an example. So best advice is to contact your devices manufacturers, and they will be able to give you the component list and also what types of chemicals can and can't be used to maintain warranty and those types of things. But we've given some generic guidance of where to start, and that's what's in the playbook. And then the next part really is training, and certainly these technologies are new to both individuals, teams, organisations, and potentially change the way that the work management system is being used. So we'll be changing the human-to-human interaction, the interaction with the environment. So it's always important to look at both the individual and the system. And we've put together some suggested safety awareness overview training categories, as you can see here. And that enables you to look at the holistic cycle of how you deploy these types of technologies across enterprise. So again, relatively generic, and as Gary alluded to, this all needs to be based on context, individual tolerances and preferences, as well as just the way that your organisation is set up and the way that you've set up your whole technology adoption. And as Gary mentioned as well, that time pressure or the pressure to succeed because you are, obtaining budget and trying to do these pilot type programs and then accelerating into scale, you really need to be very careful about how much that pressure can put onto the perceived and real risks and issues. So that can be part of the training. And one of the big things as well to be wary of, these devices have cameras, and it's one of the big challenges to overcome is the adoption around the use of cameras in the workplace. So this is a change management exercise as much as it is about upskilling in terms of knowledge. It's really about getting people more comfortable with these technologies and progress step by step.
Yeah.
So we'll hand over to you, Sarah.
There we go, Sarah.
Yeah, so, some of the barriers we've heard from employers are that they are worried that this type of technology may not be suitable for their workplace. And when you're implementing something, it's important to ensure that the risk you're solving for is reduced, and you're also not bringing in new risks or hazards with the solution that you're adopting. So we're really excited to be partnering with AREA to showcase, this risk assessment tool. It's a new initiative. This will be available later this year, and it's something that would be a great addition to your management of change process and something to include whenever you are piloting AR technology. I'll hand it over to you all to talk more about it.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Perhaps I can just add a little bit of context. The area has a research committee, but also research capability. So we ask all the area members every 6 months what kind of research would be useful and applicable for them and applied research. And this project or this piece of research came out to the third research project. And to be clear, we're just starting our 11th one, and the 10th one has just been completed. So we've done lots of really interesting pieces of research. But this has always been a very useful tool in that it identifies through conversations with the area members and the experts the kind of what I call the gotchas, the kind of things that if they would have known, they would have asked the question as they were going through the project. So it's a kind of a great resource, and we're excited to be working with NSC to be able to make this available online, because it does have the latest information, the kind of questions you should be asking. I'll be honest, it's not solving the problems all the time, but it's at least identifying what the problems are, some of the information you should be considering, if there's any kind of standards or safety considerations, and creating that risk kind of register or risk list so you can manage it appropriately as you go through the implementation of the project. So it's going to be super useful. I think, Sarah, hopefully across multiple platforms as well, so including web and mobile and different parts as well.
It'll be part of the Work2Zero website. So when someone is looking at AR as a technology solution, they can click on the risk assessment tool and kind of work through it to see where they are in the process and where they need to go.
Fantastic, thank you. I know Gary or Cameron, any kind of final thoughts before I pass back to Sarah for the last part?
I'll go then, Gary. Only one thing I'd say is to validate. We've been working on this, and I've certainly been using elements of this for my own practice. And one thing I would suggest when these things come out, and also for the playbook as well, is to validate. The best way to validate the generic assumptions is to spend as much time upskilling yourself, using and immersing yourself in AR. So if you have access to devices, even if it's to borrow it from anybody that you can get your hands on, spend as much time as you can, 10 minutes a day, experiment, try different things out so that you can really get an understanding of what some of these issues truly mean rather than just words on a page. And that would be my main suggestion is, spend as much time as you can to explore yourself so that you're in a far better position to mitigate these risks in the workplace. Yeah,
thanks, Gary.
Yeah, the only thing I'd really say is that, this is a new area, and there are very few qualified occupational health and safety practitioners working in this environment, and probably the three of us on the panel today are the leaders in both those key areas. And I know Cameron and I certainly are more than happy to take questions and offer support and advice and share our learning over the past few years. So happy to hear from colleagues who may be listening to the webinar.
Perfect. And we're going to make sure when it's delivered, and again, working with Sarah, we'll have a feedback loop. So if people have got updates, suggestions, questions, then we'll do that, and it will come back into the safety committee for kind of wider review as well. So that's really great. Okay, so finally, I'm going to hand back to Sarah with one of the events that you're running pretty soon. So if you could talk a bit about this, it'd be great.
Yeah, just a couple of events that National Safety Council and specifically Work2Zero are working on. We have our Congress and Expo coming up in September. So the Safety Technology Pavilion will be a big hit in the exhibition area. And Work2Zero is working on releasing a workplace violence report and also talking about some case studies of employers adopting technology. And then kind of a smaller, more intimate, just people interested in safety technology in the workplace. We have our Work2Zero Summit and Expo coming up next year in Long Beach, California. And, if you guys ever want to get in touch with Work2Zero or partner with us, reach out to us on our website, nsc.org/Work2Zero. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll be putting these on the area website events page as well, so they'll be there for people to see.
Thank you.
So finally, just thank you all for your time and expertise. It's always great doing these webinars with people that just are work so hard in this space, but also willing to give their time and their expertise. So I can't thank you enough, both Sarah, Cameron and Gary. So if there's any questions, I know there's been some questions in the chat box, we'll get back to you, or in the questions box, we'll get back to you with answers to those things. And please feel free to reach out for me if you're interested in the area or any of the stuff that's gone on today. So thank you very much, guys. And we'll see you again on the next webinar around the area and area safety work. Thank you.